There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a man who has stopped expecting anything good to happen to him. It isn't the quiet of peace. It isn't the quiet of a Sunday morning with coffee cooling on the porch rail and the sun still soft behind the hills. It's the other kind, the kind that creeps in after years of doing everything right and still losing. The kind that makes a man stop looking at the road because the road hasn't brought him anything worth keeping in a long time. Eli Cutter had that quiet in him deep as a root, deep as the limestone shelf that ran under his 40 acres in the hill country west of Kerrville, Texas, stubborn and unyielding, and cold even in August. He'd had it since the winter he buried his wife, Ruth, on the slope above the dry creek, and he'd carried it so long he'd stopped noticing the weight of it. He was mending a fence the morning everything changed. Not dramatically, not with thunder and revelation. Just a woman on foot coming up his south road with a toolbox in her hand and a look on her face that said she was not lost and she was not asking permission. He almost sent her away. Almost. That's the part that still catches in his chest when he thinks about it. How close he came to saying no thank you, ma'am, and turning back to his wire. How close he came to choosing the quiet over the noise of being known again. What follows is not a love story exactly. Or maybe it is, but not the kind people expect. It's the story of a man who had decided without quite deciding to stop, and a woman who arrived with a toolbox and a dead husband of her own, and a particular talent for making people feel like they were worth the trouble of knowing, who quietly, stubbornly, without asking his permission, refused to let him. This is the story of Eli Cutter's last season of being alone, and the first season of everything after. The post-hole digger hit limestone at 14 inches and rang like a bell. I heard it from 30 feet away, that hard metallic clang that every rancher in the hill country knows in his bones, and I watched Eli Cutter go still, just for a half-second. His shoulders tightened beneath his chambray shirt, sweat dark at the collar, and then he exhaled through his nose and adjusted his grip and drove the digger down again. Same spot, same angle, like arguing with the earth was something he'd made a habit of. I should explain who I am and why I was there. My name is Dolph Rays. I run a small operation 6 miles east of Eli's place, 30 head of cattle, and a peach orchard my grandfather planted in 1941 that still produces more fruit than I can sell, which means every summer I end up giving peaches to people who didn't ask for them and quietly resenting the abundance. I am told I have a habit of writing things down. My wife Celestina calls it my sickness. She says I've filled 11 composition notebooks in 14 years of marriage, and that none of them contain anything useful, which may be true, but which I consider beside the point. I was at Eli's place that morning because he'd asked me to bring a come-along and a post-pounder. He'd called the evening before, which was unusual, because Eli did not call people in the evening, or in the morning, or really at any time unless something was broken. And his voice on the phone had the particular flatness of a man who had considered his options and eliminated all of them except asking for help. South fence, he'd said. Corner post is gone. Half a section of wires down. Can't do it alone. That was the whole conversation. I'd brought the equipment and arrived at 7 in the morning to find him already at it, working the hole by himself with the post-hole digger, wearing the expression of a man engaged in a private argument he was losing. Eli Cutter was 53 years old that fall. He was not a large man, but he was built the way hill country men tend to be built, lean and durable like juniper, the kind of thing that doesn't grow fast but doesn't fall over either. He had a face that had been weathered by 25 years of outdoor work into something that suggested more age than he carried, and hands that were permanently calloused at the inner knuckles from roping and wire work, and the 1,000 other small tasks that a ranch demands of a man who refuses to hire out what he can do himself. He had been doing things himself for 6 years. That was how long Ruth had been gone. I didn't know Ruth well. She and Eli had been mostly private people, the kind of couple that is complete in itself, not unfriendly but not in need of much external company. But I knew that her absence had changed something in Eli that had not unchanged. Celestina, who paid more attention to people than I did and was therefore more often correct about them, had told me within the first year that she was worried about Eli. I'd said he seemed fine. She'd looked at me with the expression she reserved for when I was being particularly obtuse. He stopped looking at things, she'd said. I hadn't understood what she meant then. I thought I understood it better now. Watching him drive that post-hole digger into uncooperative limestone with the grim, methodical energy of a man who had long since stopped expecting the earth to cooperate. I set the come-along against the truck bumper and went to help him. We worked without much talking. That was one of the things I appreciated about Eli. He didn't fill silence for the sake of it. We took turns on the digger, working the bit down past the limestone shelf in stages, until we'd got deep enough to plant a proper post. I went back to the truck for the driver and the new cedar post while Eli marked the line with his boot heel. It was while I was pulling the post from the truck bed that I heard tires on the Caliche Road. I turned to look. A pickup, older model, sun-faded blue, was coming down the South Road from the highway. That was unusual. The South Road went to Eli's place and nowhere else. Anyone coming down it was coming to see Eli, and Eli, as I have mentioned, did not generally receive visitors. Eli had turned to look too. I could see the slight set of his jaw, not unfriendly but prepared. The truck pulled up and stopped 20 yards from where we were working. The door opened and a woman got out. She was perhaps 45, 48, somewhere in that range where a person has stopped trying to look younger and hasn't yet started trying to look distinguished. She was medium height, dark-haired going gray at the temples, and she was wearing work jeans and boots that had seen actual work and a canvas shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. She was carrying a toolbox, the old-fashioned metal kind, painted red, with a hinged lid, and she set it on the ground beside her truck with the ease of someone accustomed to carrying things. "Eli Cutter," she said. Her voice carried easily, not loud, just clear. Eli looked at her, then at the toolbox, then back at her. "That's me." "Clara Holt." She didn't offer her hand across the distance. "Dale Holt's widow. I called the county extension office 2 days ago about the grazing easement on the southeast parcel. They told me I needed to talk to you." Eli took his hat off and ran his forearm across his forehead. He was doing the arithmetic, the southeast parcel, the Holt place, the easement. I could see him placing it. "Dale Holt passed last spring," he said. "March," she said. "He did." A beat, the kind of silence where two people who have both lost something recognize it in each other without naming it. "The easement's still good," Eli said. "Your cattle can cross my southeast corner the same as Dale's always did." "That's what the extension office said," Clara Holt told him. "But I drove out to look at the line fence last week, and it's in poor shape. Dale should have fixed it 2 years ago and didn't. I'd like to fix it this week, with your permission, since it borders your property." Eli looked at her for a moment. "You're going to fix it yourself." "I was going to hire it done," she said. "But the man I hired got a job in Fredericksburg, so yes, unless you have an objection." Eli didn't say anything right away. I watched him look at her toolbox again, at the way it sat on the ground, solid and well-used, and something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, more like reassessment. "We're working this section right now," he said, gesturing at the corner post situation. "Southeast line fence is about 2 miles that direction," he pointed. "You're welcome to get started. I can come take a look at what you're dealing with after we finish here." Clara Holt looked at the half-dug post hole, at the pile of wire on the ground, at me holding a cedar post like a man who'd been interrupted mid-thought. Then she picked up her toolbox. "I'll give you a hand with this first," she said. 3 goes faster than 2. I saw Eli start to decline. I knew the shape of it, the slight straightening of the spine, the breath drawn in, and then he stopped. Let the breath out. "All right," he said. She knew what she was doing. That was the first thing. There is a particular annoyance that comes from having someone offer to help who then requires more managing than the task itself, and Eli would not have tolerated it. Not that morning, not in his general disposition toward people and their intrusions. But Clara Holt didn't require managing. She looked at the hole, looked at the post, looked at the come-along situation Eli had staged for pulling the wire tight, and asked one question: "Is that corner brace going in before or after we set this post?" And then worked from the answer. I found myself watching her and Eli more than I was watching my own work. There was something odd about it. Not uncomfortable, odd. Like watching 2 instruments that had been tuned to different keys somehow not clashing. Eli is a precise worker. He measures twice, and he's quietly irritated by people who don't. Clara matched that without being told to. She measured the brace lumber herself, marked it with the carpenter's pencil she produced from her shirt pocket, and cut it on his sawhorses with the economy of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. They didn't talk much. What talking there was went like this. 2-inch gap on that staple. I see it. Or wires twisted here, back about 6 feet. Got it. Or nothing at all, because nothing needed saying. I have known Eli Cutter for 14 years. I have worked alongside him on roundups and branding days and the occasional fence job, and I have always felt with Eli a slight pressure to justify my presence, to be useful enough to warrant being there. I had always assumed this was a quality of Eli's, some reserve or standard he held the world to. Watching him work with Clara Holt that morning, I revised my understanding. He wasn't holding the world to a standard. He was holding himself apart from it, and the standard was an excuse. Because with her there was no pressure, there was just the work. We finished the corner post by 10:30. Eli poured coffee from his thermos, one of those old steel ones that holds heat like an argument holds a grudge, and offered some to both of us. I took mine and sat on the tailgate. Eli leaned against the truck. Clara sat on her toolbox with her coffee mug in both hands and looked out at the pasture where Eli's small herd was grazing. How many head? She asked. 22, Eli said. She nodded, not condescendingly, just noting. Dale ran 38 when we first came here, she said. We were down to 29 when he died. He said the market wasn't worth expanding. It's not, Eli said. He was right about most things, Clara said. Then quietly, not everything. She said it without apparent intention, the way people say things they've said to themselves so many times they've stopped registering the weight of them. Then she drank her coffee. I was watching Eli. He was looking at the pasture. Something in his face had gone still in a way that wasn't his usual stillness, not the closed-off version, but the kind that comes when something has touched a place you forgot was there. My wife was right about most things too, he said. He said it to the pasture, not to Clara. She wanted to put in a stock tank on the east side, said that slope caught water and we were wasting it. I told her it wasn't worth the cost. He paused. I put the tank in the year after she died. It fills up every spring. Clara didn't say I'm sorry, or that's a hard thing to know, or any of the other things people reach for in those moments. She looked at the pasture, too. Dale wanted to fix that fence 2 years ago, she said. I told him we didn't have the money. We did have the money. I was scared to spend it. She turned her mug in her hands. Now I'm fixing the fence. The quiet that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that settles after two true things have been said in the same space. I drank my coffee and kept my mouth shut, which I am told is not always my strong suit, but which I managed that morning. We walked the southeast line fence after. It was, as Clara had said, in poor shape. Dale Holt had been a good man. I'd known him slightly, a quiet, deliberate rancher who kept to himself, but he'd been sick for 2 years before he died, and the fence showed it. 3 posts needed replacing. A 30-foot section of wire was down and tangled in the cedar brush. 2 staples had pulled from the existing posts, leaving the wire slack and singing in the wind. Eli walked the line without speaking, stopping occasionally to test the wire tension with his hand or to rock a post and check its depth. I took notes in the small pad I keep in my shirt pocket, another habit Celestina finds inexplicable, and Clara walked the other side of the fence line, examining her side of the damage. At the far end, where the tangled wire lay in the cedar, Clara put her toolbox down and started pulling brush away from the wire with her hands. She moved quickly and efficiently, ignoring the cedar scratch on her forearms, working toward the loose end. Eli watched her for a moment. Then he went to the other end of the tangle and started working toward her. They met in the middle. The wire came free from the brush, and they straightened it between them, walking apart slowly to take out the kinks, the wire running between their gloved hands in a long silver line. There was something almost balletic about it. Probably I'm the only person who would describe a wire straightening operation as balletic, which tells you something about my particular form of sickness. But it was smooth and wordless and looked like people who had done this together before. 30 feet of new wire, Eli said, examining the damaged section. 2 new posts, hours' work maybe 2. I can be back Thursday, Clara said, if that works. Eli looked at her. Then he looked at the fence. Then he did the thing I had not seen him do in 6 years of knowing him as a widower. he said something that required him to think about the future. I've got wire in the barn, and 2 cedar posts I haven't used. You could stay, and we could finish it now. We finished it in 2 hours and 40 minutes. I did my share and then made an excuse about needing to get back, which was true. Celestina needed the truck by noon, and left them at the end of the fence line with the staple gun and the last post, and the easy, settled rhythm of people who have figured out how to occupy the same space without friction. I looked back once from the truck. Eli was driving a staple. Clara was holding the wire at tension. Neither of them was talking. The sun was high, and the cedar smelled sharp in the heat, and the cattle in the far pasture were moving slowly toward the water tank on the east slope. The tank Ruth had wanted. I wrote in my notebook that evening, something happened today, not sure what yet. Maybe nothing, but Eli said the word Thursday, which I don't think he said in years. Celestina read it over my shoulder and didn't say anything, which meant she agreed with me. Thursday, I found out later, Clara came back. She came at 7, which I know because Eli mentioned it when I saw him at the feed store on Friday. He mentioned it the way a man mentions the weather, as a piece of information, not an event, but he mentioned it, which was itself information. She fixed the wire on her side too, he said, looking at a shelf of cattle minerals. Replaced a post I hadn't noticed was loose. That was neighborly, I said. She left before I could pay her for the post. You could take her money for the wire. He looked at me. I'm not going to take her money for the wire, Dolph. No, I said, I didn't think you would. He put a mineral block in his cart and moved on down the aisle. But there was something different in the way he moved. Not dramatically. Not like a man who had been struck by lightning or visited by revelation. Just lighter, maybe, by some small degree. The way a post gets lighter when you get the limestone cleared from the hole and it drops in clean. I bought my minerals and went home and told Celestina. She said, I know. I said, how do you know I just told you? She said, she called me Wednesday. I told her about the loose post. I stared at my wife for a long moment. You told her about the loose post, I said. Someone had to, she said, and went back to her cooking. Here is what I know about Eli Cutter from 14 years of neighboring. He was born in Kerrville. His father ran the same 40 acres before him. He went to Texas A&M for 2 years and left before finishing, not because he failed, but because his father got sick and someone had to come home, and Eli was the someone. He married Ruth Delaney in 1995. She was a teacher, 3rd grade at the elementary school in town, and they spent 22 years building what they had, which wasn't much by some measures, but was everything by theirs. They didn't have children, which I once asked him about, once, and he gave me a look that told me it was the kind of question you only got to ask once. After Ruth died, aneurysm, February, she was here on Tuesday and gone by Thursday, which is the kind of thing that makes the word Thursday sound different in your mouth forever after. Eli ran his ranch and kept his fences and sold his cattle and paid his bills and did not, as far as anyone could tell, do anything else. He came to the feed store. He attended the county extension meetings when they were mandatory. He waved from his truck when you passed him on the road. He was present in the way that a closed house is present. The structure was there. The lights were off. The thing about Clara Holt that I would understand better later was this. She didn't try to turn the lights on. She just showed up with a toolbox and started fixing what was broken in her own life. And some of what was broken in hers happened to border some of what was broken in his. And she didn't make a project of him, or a mission of him, or a redemption story of him. She just kept showing up. And he kept not exactly welcoming it, but not stopping it either, which for Eli Cutter was very close to the same thing. The Monday after the fence job, Clara's truck was parked at Eli's place when I drove past on my way to Kerrville. I didn't stop. I made note of it. I had my notebook on the dash, and I drove on, and I thought about the strange arithmetic of loss and proximity, about how 2 people who had each arrived at the same kind of hollow could sometimes, without exactly intending to, fill each other's echo. And I thought about Eli's face when he'd said I put the tank in the year after she died. It fills up every spring. Not grief exactly. Not anymore. Something that had been grief once and had become something else through long carrying. The way a stone becomes smooth not because anything is added to it, but because the rough parts are worn away by years of being carried in the same pocket. Clara Holt had lost Dale in March. She was still in the rough part. Eli was 7 years past it, which meant he had something she didn't yet have, not wisdom, not peace, not the neat resolution that people in stories always arrive at, just the specific, hard-won knowledge that the carrying gets lighter. Not because the stone gets smaller, because your hands get stronger. I wondered if she knew he had that. I wondered if he knew he did. I drove to Kerrville and bought my feed and came back past the same road an hour later, and the blue truck was still there. I made note of that too. That evening I called Eli to return a tool I'd borrowed the week before. He answered on the second ring, which was faster than usual. "Dolph," he said. "I've got your come-along," I said. "I can drop it tomorrow." "Bring it Thursday," he said. "I'll be here." Thursday. There it was again. "Will do," I said. "You eat yet?" "No. Celestina's sending enchiladas. She made too many." This was true. She also made exactly as many as she planned to make, but the fiction of having too many was a language Eli and I had developed over years for the transaction of care without either party having to acknowledge that care was being transacted. "All right," he said. "Tell her thank you." "I will." A pause, then unexpectedly. "I told Clara about the stock tank today. She said Dale wanted to put in a rainwater collection on their barn roof, said she might still do it." I waited. "She asked me who built my tank," he said. I gave her the man's name. "That was kind," I said. "It was just a name," he said. But he'd offered it, that was the thing. He'd offered information about a future, her future, the kind that required plans and investment, and the belief that you would be around to use what you built, without being asked to think about it, without steeling himself against the implication of it. He'd just said the name. I wrote in my notebook that night, a name, 6 years of silence, and he gave her a name for something she hasn't built yet. That's not nothing. That's a man who started looking at roads again. Celestina read it. This time she said, "Good." Just that. Good. The month of October passed the way October passes in the hill country. Slowly, beautifully, with the first cool evenings that make the cattle move differently, and the cedar smoke starting from chimneys in the evening, and the quality of light shifting from summer's blunt hammer to something more slanted and golden and bittersweet. I saw Eli twice more that month at the feed store. He was buying more lumber than usual. He mentioned, without elaboration, that the north end of his barn needed re-roofing before winter. I offered to help, and he said he'd let me know. 3 weeks later, he told me he had enough help. I didn't ask, but I filed it. The last Saturday of October, Celestina and I drove past his place at dusk on our way back from Fredericksburg, and his barn lights were on, and there were 2 trucks in the yard, his and the faded blue one, and I could hear faintly the sound of hammering. I drove on. Some things you don't need to write down to remember. That night, for the first time in perhaps 3 years, I opened one of my old composition notebooks. The third one, from 2011, the year Eli and Ruth came to our harvest dinner, and Ruth told a story about the time Eli got his truck stuck in the arroyo for 6 hours in the rain, and neither of them had stopped laughing long enough to be actually helpful, and I read through some of the old entries. I found what I was looking for on page 47. I'd written it the day after Ruth's funeral, when Eli had shaken my hand at the graveside and said, in a voice that was perfectly steady and absolutely shattered, she wanted to fix that fence. I hadn't known what fence. I'd written it down because it seemed like the kind of thing that would matter later, and I didn't understand why yet. Now I thought I understood. She'd wanted to fix the south fence. She'd said it needed proper corner posts. She'd grown up on a ranch herself. Ruth had in the Trans-Pecos, and she knew fencing the way she knew everything she cared about, with precision and attention and an eye for what would last. And Eli had said he'd get to it. And then she was gone on a Thursday in February before the frost was out of the ground. And the fence stood there needing fixing, and he couldn't make himself fix it because she was the one who'd said it needed fixing. And if he fixed it, that would mean accepting, in some irreversible way, that she was not coming back to see it done. He'd been fixing it this September when Clara Holt drove up his south road with a toolbox and a question about an easement. He'd been fixing Ruth's fence, and a widow had shown up and helped him finish it. I closed the notebook. I sat in my kitchen for a long time in the dark. Then I wrote one more thing in the new notebook because I couldn't help it. The fence is fixed now. I think the man might be, too. Not healed, I don't think that's a word that applies, but fixed. Like a fence is fixed, repaired to function, the gaps closed, the wire taut enough to hold. It won't be perfect. Nothing out here is, but it'll hold. Outside, the October wind was moving through the cedar trees. Somewhere 6 miles west, I was pretty sure there was a light on in a barn. And I was pretty sure neither of the two people in it was paying much attention to the dark. November came in cold that year. I mean genuinely cold, not the hill country's usual teasing toward winter that passes in 3 days and leaves you feeling foolish for having brought out your heavy coat. This was a sustained cold, coming down from the panhandle in a wet front that settled over the Edwards Plateau like it intended to stay, turning the cedar breaks gray and driving the cattle into their windbreaks, and putting a rime of ice on the water troughs every morning for 2 weeks straight. It was the kind of weather that tests things. Equipment, resolve. The tensile strength of whatever is holding two people's hesitation in place. I know what happened that November partly from what I observed and partly from what Eli told me later, in pieces over the course of several months, the way a careful man releases information, not as narrative but as fragments, offered when relevant, never as confession. My notebook has the dates and the details. What's in this account is my attempt to assemble them into the shape they actually had, which is not a straight line. It never was. The first complication arrived on a Thursday. It was always a Thursday with these two. I don't know if that means anything. Probably it doesn't, but I noted it. Eli's heater in the main house failed. This was not a catastrophe on its own. He had a wood stove in the living room that he'd kept operational even when the house's central heat worked fine, because he was a man who believed in redundancy and had been right to believe in it. But the combination of the failed heater and a temperature that had dropped to 19 degrees overnight, and a woodpile that he'd let get low, because he'd planned to cut more the following weekend, meant that he'd spent Wednesday night sleeping with every blanket on the bed, and gotten up Thursday morning to a frozen bathroom pipe. He dealt with the pipe himself, that I know. He told me the pipe story 2 months later, as a matter of fact, the way ranchers discuss infrastructure failures, not as hardship, but as information, the way a fence post going soft in the ground is noted and addressed without drama. What happened next was the part he told me differently. Clara came by that morning. She'd made it a habit, not every day, nothing like that, nothing that could be called scheduled, of stopping in 2 or 3 mornings a week on her way from Careville, where she'd been working with a lawyer on Dale's estate matters. She'd bring coffee from the gas station on 87, or sometimes muffins from the bakery, and she'd stop for 20 minutes or half an hour, and they'd drink the coffee and talk about whatever was in front of them. Her estate complications, his heater, her plans for the barn roof now that she had the roofer's name, whether the extended cold would affect the cedar's late-season growth. She arrived to find him in the crawl space under the kitchen with a heat gun. The way he told it, she knocked on the door, he called out that it was open, she let herself in, found the house at 42 degrees and went back to her truck. He assumed she'd left. She hadn't. She'd gotten a box from her truck bed, a portable space heater still in the box, still tagged from the hardware store, which she'd apparently purchased 2 weeks earlier and not mentioned. She set it up in the kitchen. She made coffee with the kettle on the wood stove in the living room. She found a blanket in the hallway closet that she'd apparently located during some previous visit and draped it over the kitchen chair. And then she sat down and waited. He came up from the crawl space 40 minutes later, having thawed the pipe and rewrapped it with the insulating tape he found in his toolbox, and found the kitchen warm and coffee ready and Clara reading a ranch supply catalog with the focused attention she gave to everything. He told me, I almost told her she didn't have to do that. I said, but you didn't. No, he said, I didn't. I wrote in my notebook, he is learning something. I'm not sure he knows he's learning it. That might be the only way it works. The second complication was Clara's. She had a cow with a difficult pregnancy. This is not unusual in ranching, but the combination of the cold and the particular cow, a 7-year-old Angus cross named, for reasons lost to history, Marguerite, who had delivered 6 calves without incident and apparently decided the 7th would be different, made it a night-long emergency. Clara called the vet at 2 in the morning, and the vet told her what to do and walked her through it on the phone. But the thing about a difficult delivery is that 4 hands are better than 2, and Clara, by herself on her property, had only 2 hands and 1 phone wedged between her ear and her shoulder. She did not call Eli. She told me this when I spoke to her the following week. I'd started going by her place occasionally, at Celestina's instigation, to see how she was settling in, and she said it with a slight tension around her eyes that I recognized as someone who had made a decision they weren't fully at peace with. "Why didn't you call him?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. She turned her coffee mug on the table, a habit I'd noticed she had, the same slow rotation, always 3/4 of a turn and then back. "Because I've been doing that," she said. "Asking, showing up. I didn't want him to think I needed rescuing." "Did you need help?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "But you didn't call." "I handled it," she said. "I know you did," I said. "I'm asking why you didn't call." She was quiet again. "Because if I called him at 2 in the morning, that's a different thing from stopping by with coffee. That's a different kind of—" She stopped, started again. "Dale died in March, that's 8 months, and I still hear his voice in the barn sometimes. Not literally, I know it's me, I know it's just the way loss works. But I'm not ready for someone to see the inside of that yet. And a 2 in the morning call about a difficult calving would show the inside of that." I thought about that for a while. "Did the calf live?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Marguerite too, healthy." "Good." "Yes," she turned her mug again. "I told Eli about it the next morning. He didn't say anything about why I hadn't called. He just asked if she'd taken to the calf." "Had she?" "Immediately," Clara said. "Of course. After all that, she took to the calf immediately." She smiled when she said it, a real smile, the kind that arrives without being invited because something is genuinely fine, and I thought, there it is. That was the inside of it. That smile, right there, over a difficult calving and a cow named Marguerite, and the particular relief of a thing that worked out despite everything. That was what she wasn't ready to show, and she'd shown it without meaning to, and the world had not ended. I want to be careful here about what I say and what I infer, because my role in this story is observer, and I am aware that observers get things wrong. I am aware that I have a particular tendency, Celestina has pointed this out, to find meaning in things that may simply be things, to arrange random events into narratives because I was born with the particular kind of brain that cannot stop doing that. So let me say only what I know. What I know is this: through November, Eli and Clara were in each other's company 3, 4, sometimes 5 mornings a week. What I know is that the nature of the company had shifted from the practical fence work, barn roofing, the exchange of contractor names and equipment, to something else that I would describe, if pressed, as presence. They were not doing things for each other. They were being in the same place while each of them was doing their own things. Which is, it occurs to me, actually a more intimate arrangement than the doing for. What I know is that Eli re-roofed the north end of his barn in November, and that Clara was there for 3 of the 4 days it took, handing up materials and running the nail gun on the lower courses that he'd have had to come down for, and that neither of them commented on this as an event. What I know is that Clara drove Eli to Careville twice that month, once when his truck was in the shop, once when she was going anyway and mentioned it and he accepted, and that they were gone for 4 hours each time, which is more than twice what the errands required. What I know is that Celestina, who occasionally spoke to Clara on the phone about nothing in particular, reported that Clara had begun laughing more readily. "She laughs at things," Celestina told me. "She didn't at first. When she moved here from San Angelo, she was very contained. Now she laughs at things." I asked what kinds of things. "Something Eli said," Celestina said. "About his truck, I didn't understand the reference." I thought about Eli making someone laugh. I tried to remember the last time I'd heard him do it intentionally, and I couldn't quite locate the memory. It was there somewhere. He had always had a dry humor, the kind that doesn't announce itself, a thing said quietly, dead-faced, that lands a second later than you expect. Ruth had found it endlessly funny, I remembered. She told me once that half the time she wasn't sure if he was joking for the first 10 seconds, and then it would land and she'd laugh for a minute, and he'd still be looking at her without expression, which made it funnier. He was doing it again. That seemed to me significant. The third complication was the heavier one, and it was Eli's, and it happened at the end of November. He called me on a Sunday evening. Not to ask for anything, just to talk, which was rare enough that I took it seriously. I need to say something to someone, he said. And Dolph, you keep records. I keep records, I agreed. So if I say something and then later I'm not sure I said it, I can ask you. You can ask me, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I heard him moving, the particular sound of a man settling into a chair, the faint creak of the wooden rocker he kept on his porch. I'm afraid, he said. I waited. He stopped, started differently. I buried Ruth in February. I put her up on the slope above the dry creek where she'd always gone to sit and look at the evening. The headstone took 3 months to come in. I put it in myself, leveled it with a transit and packed the base with concrete. Spent 2 days on it. He paused. I go up there on Sunday mornings, every Sunday since she died, 6 years of Sundays, and this morning I didn't go. I didn't say anything. I was going to go, he said. I had my coat on. And then I thought about something Clara had said about the rainwater collection she's planning, and I was working out the angles in my head. The slope of her barn roof, where the gutters would need to run. And then I looked up and it was 10:30 and I hadn't gone. Quiet. I'm afraid of what that means, he said. I thought about it carefully. What do you think it means? I think it means he stopped. I think it means something is changing that I didn't give permission to change. When did you ever give permission for anything that changed? I asked. Did you give permission for the limestone shelf in your post hole? He didn't say anything for a moment. That's different. Is it? A post hole is a hole in the ground. And your life is your life, I said. You didn't give permission for Ruth to be gone. You didn't give permission for 6 years of Sundays on that slope. Things change without your permission, Eli. That's not a new situation you're in. Another long silence. She wouldn't mind, he said finally. Ruth, she'd tell me I was being stupid. A pause. She'd probably say it exactly that way. You're being stupid, Eli Cutter. She called me by my full name when she was making a point. Was she usually right when she made a point? Yes, he said, damn near always. Then maybe you should listen to her. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, might have been something else. It was hard to tell on the phone. I went up to the slope this afternoon, he said. Took longer, but I went. Good, I said. I told her about the rain collection project, he said. About the angles. I did not write anything down in that moment because I was on the phone and my notebook was across the room. But I memorized it. I told her about the rain collection project, about the angles. He'd gone to his wife's grave and told her about the plans forming in his neighbor's mind. Not as apology, not as explanation. Just telling her the way you tell someone you love about the things that are interesting in your world. He was letting Clara be interesting to him. In front of Ruth. That seemed to me like a man making peace with something. December arrived, and with it a particular social pressure that the hill country exerts every year with the reliability of the cedar pollen in February. The question of where you are going for the holidays, and who you are spending them with, asked with the gentle relentlessness of people who mean well and cannot conceive that a man might genuinely prefer to spend Christmas alone. Eli had spent 5 Christmases alone since Ruth died. I knew this because Celestina had invited him every year, and he had declined every year with the same gracious brevity that made it impossible to push back on without feeling like you were pushing. I did not ask him this year. I told Celestina not to ask him. She asked me why. I told her I thought it had been handled. She looked at me for a long moment with the expression she uses when she suspects I know more than I'm saying, but can't prove it. By whom, she said. Unknown source, I said. What I had observed in the first week of December was Clara Holt buying a turkey at the grocery store in Careville. I had also observed her buying 2 jars of dried cherries and a bottle of bourbon, which seemed like an interesting combination for a woman spending Christmas alone. I had observed that when I mentioned this to Celestina, she smiled slowly and said nothing, which was a type of silence I have learned to read as confirmation. I asked Eli in mid-December, obliquely, about his plans. Working Christmas Eve, he said. That post on the East Line has been bothering me. Good day to get it done. Christmas Day. He was quiet for a moment. I may have company, he said. May. Yes, he said, company. That slight hesitation, that correction, the The difference between may have and yes have was the whole story of November compressed into 3 words. Good, I said. Don't make a thing of it, he said. I'm not making anything of it. You're writing it down in your head right now. I always do that, I said. You knew that when you called me. A beat, and then, quietly, almost reluctantly, like something escaping before he could stop it. It's been a long time since Christmas was a day I wanted to get to, he said. I let that sit. It's been a long time since I wanted to get to any particular day, he said. Just been getting to days. You know, the way you do. I know, I said. He stopped. Now there are days I want to get to. I did not say anything for a moment. There are times when words are exactly the wrong response. Thursday, he said. She's bringing her Christmas plates, her mother's china. She said Dale's family never used it for Christmas and she wants to use it for Christmas. That's a good reason, I said. It is a good reason, he agreed. And then because he was Eli and Eli didn't leave feeling hanging naked in the air. The plates have a pattern. She showed me a picture, blue and white, some kind of willow design. Ruth had blue and white in the kitchen, different pattern. He paused, but blue and white. He wasn't asking me what that meant. He knew what it meant. He was just saying it out loud, so that someone who kept records would know that he had said it, that he had recognized what it meant and not run from it, that he had sat with the particular bittersweet ache of a man who loves someone who is gone and is learning, carefully and with great difficulty, how to also love someone who is here, not instead of, not replacing, but alongside. In addition to, which is, I think, the only real way it can ever work. The last thing I'll record about November and December, the last piece before Christmas itself, happened on December 20th. I drove past the slope above Eli's dry creek on my way back from a late errand. The sky was clear and the moon was up, and I could see the headstone on the slope from the road. There were 2 figures standing near it. At first I thought I was wrong, that it was the cedar shadow or my imagination or the particular tricks that moonlight plays in the hill country, but I was going slow and I looked carefully and I was not wrong. 2 people, standing at the grave, not close, not touching, just present in the same place under the same cold December sky. I drove on. I didn't write it down that night. Some things I have decided are not for notebooks. Some things are just true in the way that stone is true and they don't need recording to persist. But I am writing it now, because this is a record of what happened that fall, and what happened includes 2 widowed ranchers standing at a graveside in the moonlight, present with a loss that wasn't shared, and the particular strange grace that sometimes, very rarely, comes from standing beside another person's grief without being afraid of it. Something between them had settled. Not finished, not resolved, not neat. Just settled. January in the hill country is when you find out what held. I have been ranching long enough to know that November and December are the tests that everything looks like it's passing. The cold comes, the equipment strains, the fences creak, and if nothing has broken yet you start to believe that nothing will. Then January arrives with that flat white light and that particular stillness that feels like patience but is actually something closer to inevitability, and the things that held in November and December hold in January too, or they don't. There's no drama in it. It's just physics, just time. I was thinking about that on the morning of January 11th when Eli called. I've been out since before dawn, dealing with an overflowing tank on my east pasture. A valve failure, slow flood into the winter pasture. The kind of problem that is not an emergency but becomes one if you don't catch it fast. And I was muddy and cold, and had already used language that Celestina had repeatedly requested I not use when my phone rang. "Are you busy?" Eli asked. "Moderately," I said. "Valve failed on the east tank. Give me 30 minutes. "I'll call back," he said. "Or you could just tell me now," I said. "I'm standing in mud, it won't get worse." A pause, then I think I made a mistake. I waited. "I told Clara something last night," he said. "And I think I told it wrong, and now I don't know how to," he stopped. I have never heard Eli Cutter trail off in the middle of a sentence before. He is a man of complete sentences. Even his silences are complete. They have edges. They mean something specific. A trail-off was new. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I wasn't ready," he said. He told me the full thing in pieces over the course of the day. Once when he called back after my tank situation was resolved. Once when I went over to his place in the afternoon with the excuse of returning the post-hole digger I'd had for 3 weeks. And once more in the evening when we sat in his kitchen and he made coffee and the wood stove was going and the house felt different from how it had felt when I'd been there in the warmer months. Warmer, obviously, but also inhabited differently. The blue and white dish towel on the oven handle, the dried wreath on the inside of the door, the kind made with cedar and dried orange slices that I associated with Clara's house. A second mug, permanent now, on the mug hooks above the sink. She had not moved in. That was clear, and he said so without my asking. But her presence was in the house the way certain things are in a house, not as intrusion, not as decoration, but as evidence of continued presence. The way a cat leaves an impression in a certain spot on the couch even when it isn't there. What he had told her on the evening of January 10th was this. They had been sitting in the living room, both of them, he in his chair, she on the couch with the ranch supply catalog. She read the way other people read novels, with total and genuine attention, and she'd said something about her plans for spring. A few things she wanted to do to the Holt property. Some improvements Dale had talked about but never got to. Fencing the kitchen garden, putting in a windmill on the northwest corner. She'd talked for a while, he'd listened. And then he said it came out before he'd examined it, which was unusual for him, which was why he thought he'd told it wrong, he'd said. Clara, I need to tell you I'm not ready for. And then he'd stopped, because he didn't have the right word for what he was or wasn't ready for, and the sentence had sat there between them, half-finished, with a weight that a half-finished sentence carries that a complete one doesn't. Clara had looked at him for a moment, then she'd set the catalog down. Not ready for what? She'd asked. And he'd said he told me this with the specific pain of a man who knows he said the wrong thing, and knows too exactly how wrong it was, he'd said. For this to be something it isn't yet. She'd been quiet for a long time. Long enough that he understood that he'd hurt her, that the sentence had landed in a place he hadn't meant to aim it, in the particular vulnerable spot of a woman who had been carefully, quietly, without quite letting herself know she was doing it, beginning to hope. I know, she'd said finally, and she'd picked up the catalog. And then she'd left an hour later and said good night at the door the same as she always did, and he'd said good night, and that was that. But the I know had felt, he told me, like a door closing. Not slamming, there was no drama in Clara Holt, ever, but closing, carefully and finally, the way a person closes a door when they don't want anyone to know that something has been decided. She heard it wrong, he said to me that evening in his kitchen. What was she supposed to hear? I asked. He turned his coffee mug. He'd picked up that habit. I noticed the 3/4 turn and back. I didn't know when he'd picked it up. I meant, he stopped. I meant I want it to be something. Eventually, I was trying to say I want to go slowly. I was trying to say that the wanting is new and I'm not accustomed to it yet and I don't want to rush the wanting before I can trust it. He looked at his hands. That's not what I said. No, I said, it's not. So how do I say what I meant? I looked at him, Eli Cutter, asking me how to say something. I had lived next to this man for 14 years. I had never in my life heard him ask that. Go over there, I said, tonight. It's 8:30, he said. She's awake, I said. She's a rancher. She doesn't go to bed at 8:30. He looked at his coffee. What if I say it wrong again? You might, I said. But here's the thing about you, Eli. When you say something wrong, you know you said it wrong within about 30 seconds. And when you know, it's on your face, even when you don't want it to be. She probably saw it on your face last night. She's probably been waiting all day to see if you were going to come say it differently. He was quiet. The wood stove ticked. And if she's not, he asked. Then you'll know, I said, and you'll have tried, which is more than you've done in 6 years. That landed hard. I saw it land. I didn't apologize for it. He drank the rest of his coffee. He stood up. Leave the pot, he said. There's more in it. Lock the door when you go. And he left. I sat in Eli Cutter's kitchen for 45 minutes. I drank another cup of coffee. I looked at the blue and white dish towel. I looked at the second mug on the hook. I thought about 14 years of knowing a man, and only now in his kitchen in January beginning to understand the geography of him. What the quiet covered, what the stillness was protecting, how long a person can hold something closed before the closing itself becomes the thing that costs them. I thought about Ruth's fence. About the south corner post he'd been working when Clara drove up the road in her faded blue truck with her toolbox and her dead husband's easement question. About how it had taken him 6 years to fix the fence that Ruth had wanted fixed. About how some repairs require the right moment, and the right help, and the particular grace of someone arriving at exactly the right time without knowing they are the right time. I wrote in my notebook, sitting at Eli's table. There is a difference between waiting and being ready. Waiting is passive, it happens to you. Being ready is different. Being ready is a choice you make when you realize you've been waiting long enough that the waiting has cost you more than the risk would. Eli is not a man who makes that choice easily. He may be making it tonight. I hope he is. I hope she lets him. I locked the door and drove home. Celestina was up. She looked at me when I came in. He went, she said. He went, I said. She nodded, she went to bed. I stayed up for a while. I didn't write anything more. Just sat with the particular suspended feeling of a moment that hasn't resolved yet, that is out there somewhere in the dark and the cold, being resolved or not resolved by people who are not me, in a way I will only learn about after. He came to the feed store on Friday. I was there picking up mineral blocks. He came in and took a cart and started down the supplement aisle, and I fell in alongside him, and we walked for a few steps before he said anything. She let me talk, he said. Good, I said. I said I'd done it wrong. I told her what I'd meant to say. He paused, picked up a block, set it in the cart. She said she knew what I'd meant. She said she'd known it within about 10 minutes of leaving. Why didn't she? Because she needed me to come say it, he said. She said a woman who spent 8 months careful and slow needed to see that a man could walk himself to her door when he'd made a mistake without being asked to. He put another block in the cart. She said Dale had been good at it, coming to the door. She said she needed to know I could be good at it, too. And I said, and I came to the door, he said. Apparently that was sufficient. He looked at the block in his cart for a moment. She made tea. We talked until nearly midnight. He looked at me. I haven't talked until midnight with anyone since. He stopped. I know, I said. He looked at the shelf. She said something I keep thinking about, he said. She said, I don't need you to be done grieving. I'm not done grieving. I just need you to be present while you're doing it. He was quiet. Present while you're doing it. I've been thinking about that since Thursday night. It's a good thing to think about, I said. It is, he said. For 6 years I've been doing the grieving somewhere Ruth can see it. On the slope, at the grave, in the places she knew. And I thought that's what it meant to honor her, to keep the grief in places she could find it. But Clara, he stopped, started again. Clara doesn't need the grief to go away. She's got her own. She just wants the rest. The parts that aren't grief, she wants those parts present. I thought about that. Those parts were still there? I asked. He looked at me, something in his face that I had not seen in 6 years, something almost amused, but underneath the amusement something that was not quite hope but was adjacent to it, was the country hope in habits. Apparently, he said. February. The anniversary of Ruth's death, the 6th one. Eli went up to the slope early, before dawn, which was different from his usual Sunday morning timing. And he told me later that he'd sat up there in the dark for a long time, long enough to watch the sun come up and hear the first birds and feel the cold ease by about 3 degrees as the light strengthened. He talked to her. He told me he talked to her out loud, which he had not done in years. He told her about the winter. About the fence finally fixed. About the stock tank filling in November, about Clara. He said, I told her I was sorry it took me this long to start coming back to myself. And I told her I wasn't sure I'd have managed it without some help. And I told her the help came from an unexpected direction, which she would have found funny. Did she, I asked, find it funny? I don't know, he said, and then quietly. But I did, standing up there in the cold talking to her headstone about a woman I met while fixing her fence. I found it funny. And I thought, if I'm finding it funny, she's probably laughing. He said it without grief for once. The way you say something about someone you love when you've made some peace with the fact that they are not coming back. Not absence of grief. Nothing so complete as that, but grief that has been integrated into the ongoing fact of a life, that doesn't stop the life from moving. March. Clara's first spring on the Holt property. She put the rainwater collection on the barn roof in March. She'd gotten the roofer's name in November, planned it through December, ordered the materials in January, and installed it herself with Eli's help over 3 days in early March when the weather broke. Eli had worked out the angles she'd asked about that first October, sketched them on a paper bag in his kitchen, gone over them with the roofer, revised them when the roofer pointed out a drainage issue, and arrived on installation day with the sketch in his shirt pocket. She looked at it and said, "You've been carrying that since October." "Didn't know when you'd need it," he said. She looked at him, he looked at the sketch. The pencil was worn at the fold where he'd carried it. "Eli," she said. "Roof's not going to level itself," he said, and went to get the transit. She let him go. But I was there that day, my presence justified by some lumber she'd asked me to bring, and I saw her face when he went. And what was on it was the specific expression of a woman who has been waiting for evidence and has found it in the most unexpected place. A paper bag sketch, worn at the fold, carried in a shirt pocket since October. The rainwater collection went in over 3 days. I was there for 2 of them, Celestina for half of the 3rd. We had a camp stove going in the yard, and we ate lunch together, all 4 of us on those days, sitting on the tailgates of 2 trucks, Eli and Clara on one, Celestina and I on the other, talking about the things that people who live on adjacent land talk about. Weather, cattle prices, cedar management, the question of whether the county road was going to be graded this spring or not, the way the creek ran last month versus how it ran in a normal year. On the 2nd day, Clara told a story about Dale, about the time Dale had attempted to install a ceiling fan in the house and had managed, through a series of steps she described with the precise and affectionate exasperation of someone who had been there for all of them, to wire it so that the fan ran on the light switch and the light ran on the fan's switch, and how they'd lived with it that way for 4 months before she'd finally fixed it herself. "Why 4 months?" Celestina asked. "Because every time I said I'd fix it," Clara said, "Dale would say he was going to fix it, and I didn't want to take it from him. He knew how it was wired and it bothered him, and I thought he needed to fix it himself." She paused. "He never did, of course. He was very good at planning to fix things." Eli had been looking at his sandwich during this story. Now he said, without looking up, "I'm good at planning to fix things." "I know," Clara said. "I left a fence post loose for 6 years," he said. "I know that too," she said. He looked up. "I fixed it." "I know that too," she said, and her voice had a quality in it, not softness exactly. Clara was not a soft woman, but warmth, the specific warmth of someone who knows what a thing cost and is acknowledging the cost without making a performance of it. Celestina squeezed my arm. I ate my sandwich and looked at the half-installed rainwater collection on the barn roof and did not write anything down, because there was nothing to write that would improve on what I'd just witnessed. April. A night in mid-April that I know about only from what Eli told me, which was not much, but which was enough. He'd gone over to Clara's place on a Tuesday evening. He went on Tuesdays now, regularly, the same way she'd made a habit of Thursday mornings at his place. And they'd had dinner, which had become a usual thing, and afterward they'd sat on her porch in the warm dark and Clara had cried. Not about Dale specifically, he said, or not only. More the way grief sometimes surfaces in April, he said, after the long winter has released and the land starts to go green, and there is something about new growth that catches a person at the edges of loss and makes it present again. She'd cried and he'd sat next to her on the porch swing and not said anything, which was the right thing to do, and eventually she'd stopped, and they'd sat in the quiet for a long time. She apologized, he told me, for crying. Yes, he said, with the flat disapproval of a man who finds the apology significantly more troubling than the thing apologized for. What did you say? I told her not to, he said. I told her I'd sat up on a slope for 6 years crying on Sundays and I didn't think it required an apology from either of us. He was quiet. She said that was the thing I should have said in October, when she first came. I thought about this. What would have happened in October if you'd said it? I don't know, he said. I didn't know how to say it in October. I barely know how to say it now. But you said it. I said it, he said. May. The stock tank filled in May, as it always did, from the spring rains that came through the hill country in waves, transforming the limestone creeks from dry beds to rushing water to slow pools in the span of a few days. Eli showed Clara the tank. He told me about it in the offhand way he told me things now, not confessionally, not dramatically, just as information offered to a person he trusted with information. He'd taken her up to the east slope to see the tank, and they'd stood there looking at it full of water, the cedar reflected in the still surface, and he'd told her about Ruth wanting it, about putting it in the year after she died. "What did she say?" I asked. "She said it was a good tank," he said. Then she said, "I bet she would have liked to see it full." He paused. "I told her Ruth would have been insufferable about it," he said, "because she'd been right about it from the beginning and she would have made sure I knew it." He almost smiled when he said it, almost. "Clara said that sounded like someone worth knowing," he said. "I told her it was, I told her she was." He looked at the fence line running east from his barn. "She said, I think I already know her a little, from you." He said it quietly. It cost him something to say it, I could see that, but it was the kind of cost that doesn't leave you less than you were, the kind that leaves you more. I want to end this account not with a moment of resolution, but with a morning in May, a few weeks after the stock tank filled. I was driving the county road at just after 7, heading to Kerrville for a parts run, and I slowed when I came to the turnoff for Eli's place and looked down his south road the way I always did. Habit of 14 years. The south fence was visible from the road. Good tight wire on solid cedar posts, the corner assembly level and true, the brace running clean from the corner post. It had stayed good through the winter, I could see that from the road, and it would likely stay good for 10 or 15 years if it wasn't interfered with, which is about as good as you can ask of a fence in limestone country. Eli's truck was in the yard. Clara's was there too. At that hour, 7 in the morning, this meant she'd been there through the night, or had arrived very early, and I did not spend time trying to determine which, because it was not my business and I had a parts run to make. What I noticed, as I was looking at the fence, was that there was a figure on the east slope. One figure. Eli's posture. I knew it by now, that particular set of shoulders, the way he stood when he was not working, when he was just looking at something. He was looking at the stock tank. Not at the slope above the dry creek where Ruth's grave was, not at the house, at the tank. He stood there for maybe a minute in the early light, with the cedar going golden around him and the limestone pale, and the water in the tank catching the first sun. Then he turned and walked back toward the house. Just that. Just a man who had spent 6 years looking at what he'd lost, and who was learning, slowly and with great difficulty, and the help of a widow with a toolbox, to look at what remained. I drove to Kerrville. I bought my parts. On the way back, I pulled over at the county road and opened my notebook and tried to write down what I'd seen on the east slope. I started 3 times. Each time the words felt like too much, like explanation, like conclusion, like the kind of neat resolution that is satisfying in stories and false in life. So I wrote only this. The fence is holding, the tank is full, the slope still has what it keeps, and the house has a light in it this morning that I don't think has been on for a long time. I don't know what comes next, I know what came before. And I know that in between the two, there was a woman who showed up with a toolbox when a man was trying to fix his dead wife's fence, and she helped him finish it, and then she kept showing up, and he let her keep showing up, and somewhere in the long middle of that, in the fence work and the November cold and the Christmas plates and the midnight conversation and the April porch swing and the paper bag sketch worn at the fold, something closed became, a little open. That's all I know how to say. It may be all there is to say. I put the notebook away. I drove home. Celestina was in the yard when I pulled in, pulling cedar shoots from the fence line, a task she returns to every spring with a patience I have never quite understood. She looked up when I stopped the truck. "How were they?" she asked. I thought about the light in the house, about the figure on the east slope, about a man walking back from his tank to his house on a May morning in the hill country. "Good," I said. "I think they're going to be good." She turned back to her fence line. "I know," she said. "The cedar shoots came up with roots and all when you got them early enough. Celestina had told me that. You had to get them when the ground was still soft.